or are we also looking at income of non-custodial parents and step-parents as well?
We are looking at income of both parents, and certainly if there's been a divorce, we're looking at the non-custodial parent, and we won't make an award until we have the non-custodial parent's information, unless, you know, there's some, unless the parent has disappeared. We would never hold a child, you know, hostage because a parent has abrogated his or her responsibility.
Anthony, I get a little concerned when I hear that the answer might lie in a second mortgage during these particular economic times. I get concerned that 3 out of 4 people in this room, it's too late for that early savings program. And for most of the families here, the answer is going to lie in work. That is, people are going to get second and third jobs to make this happen. And that's a very difficult reality, because what we find about academic success is that has an impact, doesn't it? Only so many hours in a day. So I get concerned when I hear those conversations, and I get concerned that when tuition discounts get up to 40 or 50%, parents start to wonder, is it worth it? You know, the value proposition. So I think we can be doing more and need to do more with less, quickly. And some of that means not duplicating. We virtually do not regulate competition. The reason why the cost is going up so fast is because everybody's replicating. There are no efficiencies. So now we need to act counterintuitively to begin to partner schools like Lesley College with community colleges, so that while people thought of them as competition before, we can begin to eliminate the fat and the duplication of program.
Dr. Moore.
It's interesting, the home equity question. We saw what was going on in the economy about 1.5 years ago, and this is where you need to look at each institution and each student. We stopped with any supplemental request for information. We now use the FASFA totally. We know it doesn't include home equity, but with what's gone in the housing market, and those, we thought it was very difficult for the audience that we serve to include that. So now that is the one form that we ask for. We've really tried to go for direct simplification, because we found that the additional forms also became an access barrier in a variety of ways. Many public institutions have done the same thing. So again, it's very important to know what institution, what types of students. There are some differences there that have a real impact on the final cost in many ways.
I want to go to Bill, but I also want to say where the next questions are, so we'll have a microphone nearby. Yes, Bill.
Just an addendum. We don't require home equity either. You know, we stopped that a couple of years ago, and as we all know, that there are lots of people out there with underwater home equity as opposed to anything they could really tap. It's very, very difficult out there.
Do you look at home equity?
We do not look at home equity. We use the free federal financial aid form.
We have a question right in the back here. Yes.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. My question is for Dr. Samuels and for others on the panel that would like to answer it. I know when we opened the program there was a show of hands and there was a variety of different folks here in terms of having 2 years out, maybe 5 years out, or more like me with 10 years out. My question has to do with planning, and what type of planning and strategies can parents employ now to plan for the future, with private colleges probably going to exceed $100,000 and public to exceed $40,000 or $50,000, at least when my children reach that age. What type of things can we start doing now to prepare for later?
The first thing is, don't stop at the financial aid office. Walk across the hall to the career services office and take a look at the internships, paid or unpaid. Take a look at the career placements, the acceleration up the vertical career ladder, because the answer lies in part on financial assistance and in part on ingenuity and hard work. Joe mentioned the growing trend towards 3-year baccalaureates. My kids have told me they're going to have double majors, they're going to live in 3 different countries, they're going to have 4 or 5 different careers. And they've got it all figured out, right? And the funny thing is, scarily, they could be right. And so what that means is that that career return that we talked about on investment has to be an intimate part of the total financing package. That wasn't the case when we went to school. You know, the career office was in the basement. Now, smart colleges have the career office right next to the admissions office as a deal closer. Others may want to add.
Yes.
Well, I would say, number one, there was this myth that it wasn't wise to save because you'd be less eligible excuse me, for financial aid. It's wrong. So one of the issues is, depending upon how old your kids are, quite simply save, and there's a variety of ways, and there's a full discussion on that. But here's the other linkage to finances. Depending upon how old your kids are, let's say they're in first or second grade, my first response is not the financing. My first response is, do you read to them? What are you doing on the educational side? There is a high correlation here between financial access and educational preparation. And the more qualified your kids are for the range of colleges and universities, that's going to afford you greater financial options. And sometimes I think we go too quickly into the financial scheme, and I know that's the focus of today's conversation, but we really can't say enough the importance of the parents or the family with young children on being involved in their education, and we do not make clear enough the link of that to the financial options that arise 10, 12 years later.
And just adding to that, I've taken the advice. I've been in higher education for 26 years. My grandson, my daughter and her husband's first child, he is 5 years old. And I decided that I was going to save now as a grandparent to prepare them and to be able to provide and contribute to his education. I don't ask the question, you know, are you going to college? I'm like, what college are you going to attend? That's Harvard, that's MIT, this is UMass Boston. You know, I am pointing those things out, and a huge part of what is involved in their family is constantly reading. It's bedtime, 5 books. 1 book at least 5 times. You know? So it's really trying to think about preparing your child, getting them ready, as Joe has already said. And I'm taking the advice from my colleagues and just what I know as a profession. You know, we really do have to do a lot to prepare our children for that very next step.
John,
You know,
yes.
I think just to go to the heart of the question, obviously the earlier the better. I'm the parent of a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old, and college funds were set up for them before they were born. We've made monthly contributions since that time. When the 529 came on the market, we bought 529s. I'm lucky enough to have parents myself that care about their grandchildren and have made contributions. And you know, there's just no underestimating the power of compounded interest. I don't have 4 years of total college costs saved, but I've got significant resources ready to help my kids go to college, and I think that's important. I think that the other danger, the earlier you are in the process, if you're 10 years away or 15 years out, again, we talked sticker shock earlier. I've heard people say to me, you know, the costs are just so astronomical at this point, and they're going to be so out of sight by the time my kid comes along, it's not worth it. It's not worth putting aside $50 a month. That's wrong. That is absolutely wrong. Getting on a schedule and being disciplined enough to continue to contribute through difficult times. And, you know, really, when you come right down to it, what's the single best thing that you can give to your child in today's world? It's an education. You know, not a vacation, and not parties or trips or things like that, but it's an education. And, you know, being committed to that, it might involve some hard conversations with the child as they get into their teens. You know, we're not going to do this because we're going to do this. Your birthday present will be this, a contribution to your 529 program. If they care enough about the educational outcome, then those kinds of decisions have to be made. Some sacrifices involved, but being committed to a savings plan is the key.
Yes, we have a question over here. Any other questions? Yes, we have a question right down in the front. Yes.
I'm Arne Thorsen. I'm the Director of Business Studies for the Center of Accelerated and Professional Studies at Becker College. For us, we have an adult student, which we haven't talked about much here, but Dr. Moore mentioned this and said something interesting about loans. They are not particularly favorable to the adults. Our adults are scared of taking loans. The other thing is the tuition reimbursement that these people get from companies is at 5250, that max that in terms of tax credit for both companies and individuals. And it stayed that way for 20 years. What are we doing as an industry to help the adult learner, because these students are losing jobs. They're being told that tuition reimbursement is lowered or even taken away for the companies because of the economy. It doesn't seem that we're doing much for these people. They're struggling. And as Dr. Moore said, this is the population that's ever increasing. It's becoming more and more important. There's almost a message here in this country for the adult learner that we don't really care much about your education when those things are happening, tuition reimbursement going down. And for that limit to be 5250 for 20 years is astounding to me. So what are we doing as an industry to help it? Maybe Dr. Samuels and Dr. Moore can address that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Arnie. I want to tie this into a conversation about college debt. Not the student debt, but the college debt. What Becker College is doing practically overnight, I noticed this because my wife drove by a new campus the other day in Southborough. Becker has campuses, wonderful, bucolic out in Leicester, and a career college in a neighborhood in Worcester. But what most people don't know is recently they acquired a no-frills campus in Southborough. And what my prediction, Arnie, is that it's not going to come from the government, any subsidy. The only way we're going to be able to make higher education more affordable for the working adult is to develop programs that are accelerated, which Becker's doing, that are no frills. I don't know if you read about the recent new campus from the University of Southern New Hampshire, right on the borderline, and they interviewed two kids. One kid who wanted the athletics, wanted the residential life, and the other kid who actually didn't want that, had a technical career. So those two things, accelerated programs and no-frills campuses, are coming to a neighborhood, your neighborhood.
Dr. Moore?
I think the federal government probably is not going to be a help here. The largest grant program in the country is the Pell Grant program. 0.5% of those funds go to adult learners because the needs formula, the needs analysis, leaves most adults out. Okay? So there's that. Loans. Most of the federal loans aren't available to adult learners because if you matriculate less than half-time, you're not eligible. And most adults are working, raising a family, so they can't go. So here are the two prime access points of the federal government that are basically inaccessible to adults. So we go down to Washington, D.C. to lobby on behalf of the adults. And the staff tell us, we can't figure out how to get adults into the loan program because when traditional students finish, you have a 6-9 month period, and then your loans begin. What do we do with the adults who continue on and go part-time? And a few of us said to them, it's easy. They're looking for a short-term loan. They're not expecting to wait until they start paying it back. These are people who have car loans, mortgages. They're looking for a loan to help them pay the bill. They expect to start paying it on a monthly basis and what the term is. The young staff couldn't figure it out. Why? All the staff were traditional age students. They're 27 years old. They work in the congressional offices, and they all went to traditional institutions. So what's happened is this has become, I think, an issue with individual institutions who are really trying to serve adult learners. A vast number of private and especially public regional and community colleges where you see that enrollment growth going on, a lot of that is adults going back. And we don't get to Obama's 50% of the workforce with a college degree without changing the financial dynamics around adult learners. You can't get there statistically. But right now it's coming down to individual institutions. And there's very little state support for the public institutions on the adult learners. And so it's really come down to Becker, Leslie, UMass Boston, a variety of places who are trying to figure out what do we do with tuition rates and how do we get the right program without a lot of frills because adults want to move to their degree. Finally, the greatest advantage for the adult learner is a lot of the institutions have a thing called assessment of prior learning. If you're 42 years old and you're going back, at many of these institutions you can take a course called assessment of prior learning where you document prior college level learning that you've picked up at work. It's reviewed by faculty. It's quite rigorous. And that can earn people anywhere from 10 to 30 or 40 credits towards their degree, and they don't pay the full tuition for the award of those credits. It's one of the great access issues for adults that most people in this country don't even know about, and it's available at many institutions.
Liliana, how has UMass changed to make the environment more acceptable to